Hello all, my name is Misty A.G. and today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about my instructor assigned pioneer in the field of educational psychology, which is Mr. David Premack. And his theories include, but are not limited to, the Premack principle and theory of mind. Going into my pioneer's early life, David was born in Aberdeen, South Dakota on October 26, 1925, to parents Leonard B. Premack and Sonia, I'm going to say Lisa Premack. And David Premack sadly passed away on June 11, 2015, in Santa Barbara, California. Going into Mr. Premack's early professional and personal life, he attended the University of Minnesota and got his BA in chemistry and liberal arts, his MA in experimental psychology and statistics, his PhD in experimental psychology and philosophy. For 3 years, he was also enlisted in the Army from 1943 to 1946. In 1951, David Premack married Anne James Premack, and together they had 3 children named Ben, Lisa, and Timothy. Going into his employment, it was pretty, extensive, in my opinion. He was an instructor at the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis from 1953 to 1954, a research assistant at Yerkes Laboratories in primate biology, a research associate professor, University of Missouri, Columbia from 1955 to 1964, a visiting associate professor at the University of California, Los Angeles in 1964. He was a professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara from 1965 to 1975. He was a visiting professor at Harvard University, Cambridge from 1970 to 71. He was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania from 1975 to 1990, and he also was a visiting scientist at CREA École Polytechnique. Going a little bit into David Premack's psychologist career, the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is the Premack principle, which states that any behavior A that is more common than another behavior, behavior B, can serve as a reinforcer for B. Basically, if behavior B is of higher probability than behavior A, then behavior A can be made more probable by making behavior B contingent upon it. I have included a YouTube address right there if you need more of an explanation on this. I'm going to be getting more into the Premack principle a little bit later. Also, he developed theory of mind, which is the ability to infer the mental states of other individuals. He made several contributions, such as the groundbreaking studies on comparative cognition and symbol use in chimpanzees, and understandings of intentionality and casualty cognition in human infants and children. Mr. Premack wrote several books. The first book I'm going to talk about is Original Intelligence, The Architecture of the Human Mind in 2002. In 1996, he wrote Casual Cognition, A Multidisciplinary Debate. In 1986, he wrote Gavagai, or The Future History of the Animal Language Controversy. In 1984, Mr. Premack wrote The Mind of an Ape. And last, intelligence, in ape and man in 1976. Okay, I'm going to expand some on David Premack's theories. Of course, you know about the theory of mind. I'm going to go a little bit into depth about this. During infancy and early childhood, various behavior are learned from which form the basis on which future theory of mind will develop. Behaviors that begin to take into account others' point of view include mimicking and joint attention at 6 to 12 months and pointing from 12 to 18 months. Toddlers become aware of others' emotions and are able to name those emotions even if they do not feel them. In addition, they begin to comprehend the unique likes and dislikes of others and separate to some degree between imagination and reality, as seen in pretend play, which appears at this point. The emergence of true theory of mind occurs from about 4 to 5 years as executive functioning improves. At this point, more complex perception of unique desires of others is expected. For example, although I want the car, she may want something else, which is alongside the possibility of hidden feelings. Theory of mind impairment refers to the state in which theory of mind does not develop as expected. This state may result from a neurological, cognitive, or emotional deficit. This impairment exists most prominently in autism spectrum disorders, ASD, and serves as one of the most primary characteristics. Individuals with ASD who present high cognitive abilities and verbal knowledge still display difficulties passing theory of mind tasks. He came up with a few theories also about chimpanzees and how it relates to abstract. I'm going to be talking to you about the Code of Man and Beasts, of course, written by David Premack while he was at the University of Pennsylvania. Exposing the chimpanzee to language training appears to enhance the animal's ability to perform some kinds of tasks, but not others. The abilities that are enhanced involve abstract judgment, as in analogical reasoning, matching proportions of physically unlike exemplars, and at completing incomplete external representations in action. The abilities that do not improve concern the location of items in space and the inferences one might make in attempting to obtain them. Representing items in space and making inferences about them could be done with imaginal code, but representing relations and judging the relations between them, as in analogies, requires more of an abstract code. Language training cannot instill such an abstract code, but for species that have the code to start with, it may enhance the animal's ability to use it. Basically, in this article, he is talking about humans have abstract ideas, so they are able to comprehend them, and that basically the experiment that they did, chimpanzees do not have concept of abstract code. Moving on to language as a key to human intelligence, I'm just going to go over a few things. I'm not going to read the whole article here. Basically, it talks about humans have acquired 6 symbol systems, 2 that evolved, which are the genetic code and spoken language, and 4 that we as humans invented, which are numbers, written language, music notation, and a system for coding choreography. And it goes on to further say that voluntary control of sensory motor systems, a laboratory chimpanzee does not call to attract the attention of its trainer. Instead, it pounds on a resonant surface. It's going to do this because it doesn't have a way to communicate, hey, come here, I need food, I need water. It suggests that they did not evolve like speech or sign. But of course, speech and sign travel with the speaker in a way that stones and resonant surfaces do not. As for imitation, Many species can copy the object or location chosen by a role model, and this is the first level of imitation. As for teaching, which is strictly human, it reverses the flow of information found in imitation. And unlike imitation, in which the novice observes the expert, the teacher observes and judges. So imitation produces a rough copy and teaching smoothens it. Basically, it's just saying that animals, chimpanzees, they can't, teach. They can only imitate. There's no evidence of recursion in chimpanzees. It is as though chimpanzees had evolved a non-recursive language. Chimpanzees, even when taught analogies, could not use them to form words. Talked about that in the Code of Man and Beast. A major distinctive feature of human intelligence is flexibility, and animals, by contrast, are specialists. For example, time. Time is a classic example because it's spatial. It's a spatial metaphor, which means that space has normal sensory properties. And we can both see and feel it, but we can neither see nor feel time. Last on the slide, I'm going to read to you the abstract of his theory that infants attribute value to self-propelled objects. Very interesting stuff here. Motion, of course, as you know, is a fundamental source of information for basic human interpretations. It is basic to the fundamental concept of causality, and the present model argues equally basic to the fundamental concept of intentionality. When an infant perceives an object moving spontaneously and displaying goal-directed action, it will interpret the object as intentional and assign it to the unique properties of psychological domain. The key property tested was, do infants attribute values to interactions between intentional objects using criteria specified by the model? And basically, summing it up, the results suggest that well before the age when the child can ascribe mental states or has what I have discussed earlier, theory of mind, it recognizes the goals of self-propelled objects and attributes a negative or a positive values to those interactions between them. Okay, moving on to what I find to be the most interesting part of this project, the pioneer influence on teaching. Of course, I've talked about the Premack principle, which is actually a form of operant conditioning, and it can be used in the classroom, and I will tell you a little bit about that in a second. If you remember, operant conditioning is a theory that states that behavior can be learned through its consequences, and in other words, we'll behave a certain way in order to get things we want or to avoid things we don't want. In everyday life, this equates to rewards and it equates to punishments, which is known as reinforcement. Basically, the Premack principle is the theory that organisms will do something they don't quite like doing, for this example, homework, in order to do something that they do like to do, like playing a video game. In the article Learning to Teach by Peter Bryant, it talks about David and Anne Premack's work called Original Intelligence, Unlocking the Mystery of Who We Are. I'm not going to read too much about it, but it just goes into their influence on teaching and what they believed and what we can go by. The Premacks argued strongly for the existence and importance of modules, highly specialized mechanisms for acquiring different forms of knowledge. Also, early on in their book, Original Intelligence, there's a chapter on pedagogy, in which the Premacks claim that the root of human pedagogy lies in aesthetics and the judgment of beauty, which, like charity, begins at home. Basically, in the way of teaching and their influence on it, I should say his influence on it, David, students will do something they don't like in order to do something they do like. Okay, students, get out your math workbook, turn to page 32. You're going to do pages 32 to 33, and when you finish, you're going to turn it in. As soon as you finish, you may go to the corner and read a book or play in centers quietly. So basically what I just said is students are going to do something they don't like to do, the worksheet, in order to do something they do like. The students love playing games or reading books. The theory of mind that he coined is not too connected to teaching, but it is a neuroscience. I'm just going to go into how this is, had an influence on teaching for me so far. I use it quite a bit in substituting, and now on full time at the high school I work at, is if ... then ... which is Grandma's rule. If you do A, then you can do B, which is really interesting because I'm actually learning about that last week in my other class I'm taking this semester, classroom management. And the Premack principle is connected to classroom management for those very reasons. He was insistent on modules. We use that today in the classroom. We use the Premack principle in the classroom as a form of operant conditioning, and it's very effective. Last, I'm going to be talking to you about his late life to death. He retired from the University of Pennsylvania in 1990. He moved to France with Anne, and he studied cognition in young children. He then later returned to Santa Barbara, and in 2005, he got the William James Fellow of the American Psychological Society Award, which is very prestigious. And of course, as I have stated earlier, he did pass away on June 11th, 2015 in his home at Santa Barbara, California. This concludes my presentation for today. I hope that you have all enjoyed learning a little bit more about my instructor-assigned pioneer, David Premack. Thank you all and have a great day.